Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our second community question and answer session. For those of you who were able to join us 2 weeks ago, we're glad that you're able to be with us again this evening. We're going to follow the same format that we did when we were discussing mixed use. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, I'd like to explain what tonight's session will look like. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for your participation this evening and your willingness to learn more about this opportunity. The first part of this evening is going to be a presentation by experts on traffic and local ecology, and then we're going to give everybody the opportunity to ask questions. When you RSVP'd, some folks have submitted questions in advance for this evening, and you'll be able to submit questions throughout the entire presentation. If you're new to Zoom, you have a toolbar that may be hovering at the bottom or the top of your screen. When you move your cursor over that toolbar, you'll see a little icon that says Q&A, and a box will pop up there that will allow you to submit your questions. When the questions come in this evening, there's also other members of our team from Burgess & Burgess that will be helping to curate those questions. Not all the questions will be addressed tonight, but we will make sure that we're recording all of those. And in this webinar format, you'll notice that we don't see anyone who's an attendee on the screen. The only people that you'll be able to hear and see this evening are our panelists. So what I would like to do this evening is introduce our experts. So we'll be hearing from 4 individuals tonight, but we'll have some additional people that are also experts in the field that will be able to answer some of our questions. I'm going to go ahead and take myself off of the screen as I introduce, and then our panelists will be able to go ahead and share their contents. So joining us this evening, we have Alex Zeka, and Alex is the Senior Vice President for Conservation Transactions with the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. He oversees all conservation projects the Land Conservancy takes on throughout its 21 county service area. Some of his responsibilities include generating funding and completing unique and complex conservation projects, including conservation easements, property acquisitions, property dispositions, mitigation, and habitat restoration. Our next 3 panelists that will be with us this evening are from AECOM. AECOM is the world's premier infrastructure and design firm delivering professional services throughout the project lifecycle. AECOM is ranked #1 in Transportation Engineering News Record's top 500 design firms for 2020, while being the #2 design firm overall. AECOM has provided quality engineering design services in Ohio for over 60 years. Tonight we have with us Vanessa Neum. Vanessa is a registered professional engineer and professional traffic operations engineer. Vanessa has spent 14 of her 16 years of experience with AECOM. She is the traffic practice lead for Ohio and oversees staff in 4 locations across the state. As a senior traffic engineer and project manager, Vanessa's clients range from public clients, including ODOT, to private developers. Vanessa is the current project manager on the ODOT statewide signal system timing. She has worked on hundreds of traffic signals in her career and performed traffic studies across the region. Her depth of knowledge and experience also includes a unique understanding of evaluating roadway operations performance to identify areas of concern and potential mitigating strategies for mobility and safety concerns. Joining Vanessa this evening from AECOM is Christian Lin. Christian is a landscape architect and leads AECOM's planning and landscape architecture practice in Ohio. His primary focus has been identifying opportunities to strategically leverage large-scale infrastructure investment to create or enhance the public realm through social, economic, and environmental improvements. Specifically, he's developed a depth of experience in transportation and stormwater infrastructure-oriented projects that can deliver integrated solutions to treat water quality, support multimodal connectivity, and create high-value public space. Finally with us this evening, we have Jeffrey Holmans. Jeff is an AECOM Vice President and Senior Urban Planner with over 49 years of experience in the areas of urban planning, design, zoning, environmental impact assessment, transportation planning, and the development of community revitalization strategies. He has been directly involved in engineering and planning studies in the Beachbrook site since 1999, serving as the project principal and planner on infrastructure improvement studies, building evaluations, and analysis of existing site conditions and overall property development. So our first speaker this evening will be Alex. So Alex, you can go ahead and take over the screen if you'd like.
Thank you, Dion, and good evening, everyone. As Dion said, I'm Alex Chaka from the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. I appreciate taking this time to talk a little bit about the Land Conservancy and our involvement here at the Beechbrook site. So quickly, I'll talk a little bit about the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, who we are. I know we're not far from this site, so many of you are probably aware of who we are and what we do. But just a quick primer, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded here in the Chagrin River Valley. The mission of our organization is to provide the people of our region with essential natural assets through land conservation and restoration. Our organization has grown pretty immensely over the last 25 years. We went from a volunteer-led organization to a staff of about 40 individuals, and our service area has expanded quite largely, quite rapidly. Really the focus of our work is 4 primary areas. We were really founded as an organization on natural areas preservation, as I said again, here in the Chagrin River Valley. And what we call natural areas are things like the Beechbrook site that we are holding, that we hope to hold a conservation easement on, but natural areas that have habitat quality, ecological value, water quality benefits, habitat for wildlife, but also recreational opportunities for people. So we still do a lot of that work daily. As our organization evolved, we became involved in agricultural conservation. We've protected somewhere near about 30,000 acres of agricultural land in Northeast Ohio to date. And essentially, the prime agricultural soils are important to Ohio's natural heritage, but also Ohio's economy. So we started working with private landowners to protect their farmland all across our region. More recently, around 2012, we launched an urban initiative that really focuses on urban revitalization, primarily in the city of Cleveland. It has a couple different components. One is developing land banks, actually statewide, raising funds for demolition, and then a Reforest Our City program. So really trying to create more livable places in our urban cores throughout our service area. And then restoration is another key component of our work that we have engaged in more recently. There's a lot of funding available for habitat restoration and also urban restoration. So it's something that we're actively engaged in, again, across our service area. Here's our service area to give you some perspective. 21 counties, Northeast Ohio. Again, we've kind of grown in size quite rapidly over the last 20 years. But you can imagine driving from east, the Pennsylvania line to Lake Erie Islands, the geography and the population and demographics of our service area changed very greatly. And one thing that I think is really unique about the work that we do is we try to provide what's best for that community. And in a highly agricultural community in northeastern Trumbull County, we'll work with the landowners to protect private land for agricultural use, so that it's not so that it can be important to that economy, which their economy is largely driven by agriculture. Where we move into Geauga County, where there's really high quality wetlands and natural places where there's a lot of parkland, and we'll try to work with the local park districts to create more accessible land to the general public. And then as we move west again into Cleveland, our work really shifts to our urban work and urban revitalization and creating better places in the urban core for people to live and work. And then you drive farther west and it turns really back into a lot of agricultural land. So as we move across our service area, we try to use different tools that are appropriate to protect the resources that are important to the people. Again, this is kind of a summary of what I just talked about. We have a pretty large region, 4.9 million acres, 165 miles of Lake Erie shoreline, a lot of different counties, a lot of different municipalities that we work in, home to a lot of people too. So we're trying to do this in concert with what people want in their region. All our parts are 16 watersheds, so both the Ohio and Mississippi watershed, a lot, just a vast area with a lot of different things going on. Some of our accomplishments as an organization, real quick, we've created over 160 public parks, over 10,000 publicly accessible acres. We've preserved over 220 working farms, which is over 28,000 acres of protected farmland. And then kind of a big stat for us as an organization is we protected over 785 properties totaling over 62,000 acres within our region. So what we all came here to talk about today is the Western Reserve Land Conservancy's involvement in the Beechbrook property. So we were engaged with Axiom several months ago about holding a perpetual conservation easement on approximately 24 acres of the Beechbrook site. So we have agreed to general terms on how that agreement will take place. frankly, the Land Conservancy is excited about every opportunity that comes across our desks. And this is an opportunity to protect 24 acres in Pepper Pike. 24 acres is not insignificant. When you look at the general area of Pepper Pike, there's not a lot of open space. So to be assured that we can protect some land here is to us, it is a conservation win. Our conservation easement will be perpetual in nature. That means it lasts forever. The conservation easement will prevent buildings, it will prevent further development, it will prevent further timbering and subdivision within that 24-acre area. It preserves the aesthetic and ecological qualities of the Willey Creek corridor. As we know, these water courses are very important to the Chagrin River, and the ecological benefits of having that natural corridor is good for not only the area, but the downstream area. And then aesthetically, everybody likes to either take a hike or walk out their back door and look at trees. I think everybody understands the impact of getting outside and breathing fresh air and looking at trees and hearing the birds, especially in these crazy times in our world today, that there's a lot of benefits associated with those. So we think that there's going to be a lot of not only aesthetic but human health benefits associated with having this green space protected and accessible to the general public. Axiom's plan is to have public use on this 24 acres, which again, I just want to stress that 24 acres is not insignificant. For us as an organization, we like to look at properties that are about 20 acres or larger, and to find a 20-acre or larger project in this area is not super common. A couple other details with the conservation easement that we intend to hold. It would allow for public park uses, so it would allow for walking trails to be put in, boardwalks to be installed. It would allow for invasive species management and ecological restoration in the future. It's something that we build into all of our easements so that we can help restore and maintain the habitat into the future if that's necessary. Just real quick, here's a picture of Willey Creek. Visited the site very recently. The Willey Creek is currently in pretty good standing. I was actually pretty impressed that it has pretty high quality habitat. There's fish swimming around and a lot of birds hanging out in this forested area. So just a quick slide to show you kind of what it looks like down in there. Just another quick slide of some of the trees that exist in the property. Here's a general location of the Beach Brook site. Just gives you an idea of some of the work that the Western Reserve Land Conservancy has done. And you all are obviously very familiar with where this is located, but just a quick slide to show the location. The yellow property that's on this map is property that the Land Conservancy has conserved, and then green property are properties that are parks and managed areas that are also in the area. So here's a general map of the area that Western Reserve Land Conservancy is interested in protecting with a conservation easement. It's outlined here in blue. The acreage here says about 28 acres. That's kind of yet to be determined, the exact configuration. But this essentially protects the corridor along Willey Creek. So one of the things I mentioned previously is that Axiom plans to make a public access portion of this project, and that's totally in line with the mission of the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. We don't own a lot of properties that are publicly accessible, and we wouldn't in this case, but our conservation easement would certainly allow for public access type of use, like a boardwalk like you see in an overlook that would really maybe fit in pretty nicely on this type of a setup where you have a pretty large topographical change and would have the ability to look down into the Willey Creek corridor. Another example of just some recreational opportunities that might come about with this project. As some of you might know, birding has become a really large recreational hobby that many people do in the area. As I said, when I walked the property not that many days ago, there was actually quite a lot of bird activity there. With some small public access improvements, you can make this really accessible and desirable for people in the community. Another quick photo here of trails. There's actually some an existing trail system on the property now, and I think our conservation easement would certainly allow for further development of a trail system so that the public could better utilize the property. And lastly, this being located so close to Orange High School, it's to my understanding that Orange uses kind of as a land lab and for bio-blitzes and things where they engage students in the school. That would certainly be a use that would be compatible with the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, and we would really highly encourage that. I think, anytime that we can get our young people out into nature and, spend some time out there, it's great for everyone. So that use would certainly be allowable and encouraged, quite frankly. So that's the end of my presentation. Happy to take any questions at this point in time.
Thank you, Alex. Christian Lin is now going to continue his presentation. We are going to hold all questions till the very end, and then the full panel will be able to answer the questions. So Christian, take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
All right, great. So, tonight, Vanessa gave a little bit of introduction by background, but what I really wanted to focus on are some of the environmental considerations that we're looking at as far as the development of the Beechbrook property, and kind of frame some of the tasks that are either ongoing or will need to be performed as, in the eventual development that would take place here. So one thing we always like to look at is what a site's history is before we really start getting into what it might be. So understanding its context in terms of how it's evolved over time. And so when we started looking at this, one thing that we quickly realized that this is, as much of Ohio was agricultural farm field up into around the early 60s, as you can see in the aerials here, just showing what these are really intended to show is just how the property was agricultural through the middle part of the century, and then slowly had regenerative growth up until what you see there today. There is often kind of the misconception that this has old growth forests, but most of Ohio, for the most part, has been farmed at some point or another in its history. So what we're looking at when we go about developing a site like this is, from a permitting perspective, there's a pretty rigorous process that has to be followed. And not to go into the nitty gritty, but there's what's called a 401, 404 permit that has to be approved and permitted through the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. And there's a number of items and tasks that a lot of which has been completed for the site, or some are ongoing. But the list here, it's looking at the cultural resources, understanding not only the wetlands and streams that exist on site, but what their quality is. And then, if it is the case that there will be impacts, how do we mitigate for them? Understanding if there's endangered species here, both from the state level as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife level. And again, if there is anything, we have to document it and understand what potentially mitigation might be required if something would be impacted. Floodplain coordination, which I know is an important topic to cover, given some of the flooding that occurs within Pepper Pike. And lastly, we have to go through a pretty rigorous process to look at alternatives, understanding what other alternatives can be explored that could potentially accomplish the same goals, design and economic goals of the project, while having a lesser impact on the site. And so that all goes into a package that's evaluated by these agencies, has a public comment review period, and ultimately decision is rendered based on the input provided. And so I mentioned a lot of that has been done to date, and some of it is still ongoing. But looking more specifically at the stormwater runoff, and typically we think of stormwater in two buckets. We think of stormwater quantity and quality. Quantity is what we think of when we're thinking about flooding, dumping more water than our natural streams and rivers can actually handle. And then quality, which is, making sure we're not kind of impacting habitat that's in those natural bodies of water that all water eventually leads into. And so we have to go through a process of permitting through the Ohio EPA Also based on Pepper Pike's requirements and the Cuyahoga Soil and Water Conservation District to make sure that we're not creating erosive conditions both on site and in the stream, and also controlling water quality and water quantity accordingly. So regardless of what is developed here, all stormwater will be required to be collected into stormwater detention facilities. These basins that will be located on the site will, based on our modeling of the current conceptual development, would have to contain up to the 100-year or manage up to the 100-year storm event. And based on Pepper Pike zoning, which is quite stringent in how it defines stormwater management, what we would implement would result in reduced stream bank erosion from an existing condition. It would reduce flooding, and it would reduce runoff into Willey Creek when we're comparing it to the existing condition. And ultimately, the development will require a sizable amount of land committed to accomplish the items listed above, which sums up to about a little over 3 acres will be dedicated to stormwater alone to manage both water quality and water quantity. Another thing that if anyone's ever been on the site or in this corridor, the site is currently has some infrastructure at both ends under Lander Road and under Gale Allison Drive that restricts the flow of water in and out of the site. And so those are existing conditions that aren't part of the property, but we create a constraint on the water flowing in and out of the site. So regardless of what happens within the development, those are pre-existing, you would say, pinch points in the natural water flow. And you can see on the left is the image looking under Lander Road. There's about 16-foot by 9-foot culvert. And on the right is Gale Allison Drive. I believe those are 2 96-inch culverts that water travels off the site. And below is a typical section on the left being the Beechbrook campus. And then you have somewhere in the range of 30 to 35-foot kind of elevation change down into what is the Willey Creek corridors, as well as the floodplain. And so Alex touched on this a little bit, and I just thought it was important to show, oftentimes we wonder how can a development objective coexist with a conservation objective. And so there are a few local examples, but this one in Mayfield Village is one that I'm quite familiar with and worked on a long time ago. But this is a 24-acre wetland preserve that was at one potentially going to be developed for the Progressive Insurance headquarters, just along 271 that you can see at the top of the screen there. As in partnership with the village, there was a land swap that occurred, preserving this 24-acre corridor, and then Progressive in turn developed the area adjacent to it, which created a mutually beneficial scenario where it created a community asset. It created a community, a benefit to the employees of that center. There's a call center there that you can imagine there are a high demand for outdoor space around those facilities. And the one thing that by putting an easement that over this 24-acre riparian area, it opened, and it would be the case here as well, it opens up that area for potential grant funding to wetland enhancement, floodplain restoration, or in areas where there is erosive conditions on the stream that exist today, those can be corrected through ecological grant funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. That was very thorough. We're going to now turn it over to Vanessa Neum. She's with ACOM, and she'll be talking about traffic, which we know is an anticipated conversation that we've been having throughout the community, and she will be able to provide some detailed insight into the past few traffic studies. So Vanessa, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for having me tonight. As Vanessa said, I'm here to talk about the traffic impacts of the Beachbrook property redevelopment. A traffic study was performed in order to assess how various changes in use on the property would change traffic capacity and volumes around the area of the development. AECOM has actually evaluated several different development scenarios with different proportions of the land use types and development densities. The current plan is a mix of residential, office, retail, and restaurant. And let me go to the next slide. So the access points of the development that were modeled are an entrance to the north on Lander Road that is basically to the parking lot of the office area, a roundabout that serves as the main entrance to the northern piece of the development, 2 residential access points to the south, and then from Chagrin Boulevard, another roundabout. So what are some important considerations when evaluating traffic? First of all, you have to have good information about the traffic in the area. So we collected traffic counts. You also have to have a measure of what is impactful and what are the impacts of any changes. So, you know, the common practice is to use level of service, which is basically a delay in seconds for traffic. And I apologize because I realize this slide is probably hard to read, but really the point is to illustrate that there are various thresholds for delay that are acceptable for traffic signals and or for stop controlled, or in this case on the slide, it's a roundabout. And it's a little bit different. A level of service C for a traffic signal, you can have delay up to 35 seconds, where at a roundabout, only 25 seconds is acceptable. So this just gives you a gauge, and the visual, I think, helps to kind of, you know, what does that feel like? What does that congestion look like? F is obviously unacceptable and unsatisfactory. In the case of a traffic signal, that would be 80 seconds of delay or more, and for a roundabout, 50 seconds. So that's just to give you a little bit of background of the parameters that we use to judge what kind of impacts and what the level of service is today and what it would be with the development and without the development. You also have to determine the appropriate peak hours. When is the traffic the highest, and use that for your worst case modeling. You need to take into account delays and capacity, the volume of traffic, make sure that you model the proper scenarios. Trip generation is a big piece of this as well, which is basically a estimate of what type of traffic would come from the development. And so we use those land uses that I described and break down how many trips are going to be generated by this new use of the site. You also have to make sure you have an appropriate study area and that growth factors match what the growth in the area reflects, and have a realistic expectation of when the property would open. And you need to consider what reviewing agencies would be involved. So in a lot of cases, it would be the ODOT, Department of Transportation, and we use their standards for a basis of most of what we do. So this shows the study area that we included. We included all 5 legs of the Lander Circle north of the property, and obviously the entrance locations along Lander Road and Chagrin Boulevard to the south. ODOT's State Highway Access Management Manual lists that you would use 1,000, this would be considered a level 1 study, and you would at a minimum include 1,000 feet beyond all existing and proposed site drives, which was included in this study. So how were the traffic volumes determined? Traffic was collected during the morning and afternoon peak hours on a typical weekday in May of 2018 when school was in session. There were no holidays or adverse weather conditions. May is typically a great time of year to do traffic collection. Also, this was obviously pre-COVID, so traffic volumes were typical. Traffic counts conducted by ODOT in the area were done in 2016 and 2019 as a comparison to get an idea of what the growth rate would be. And actually, traffic volumes have gone down from 2016 to 2019. It's very rare in a traffic impact study that you would use a negative growth rate, which we did not, of course, even though the trend in the area is in the negative. We we looked at what has been going on in the area. Now, there's not a whole lot of room for development in Pepper Pike. So a 1% growth rate would be appropriate. However, we wanted to account for additional growth from the developments at Pinecrest and Moreland Commons. So we used a very conservative growth rate of 3%. And conservative in this case, meaning we put more traffic. We put more traffic than maybe would even occur to really capture a worst case scenario. So we overestimated, if anything. So those existing volumes that we collected, again, based on the 2018 data, was grown by 3% every year up until 2023. And then we added on top of that the trip generation estimates that we made for the site itself. So the trip generation is used or is calculated using the ITE trip generation manual. It's widely accepted tool to establish what type of developments or what traffic would come out of developments. Another piece of this is taking into account the fact that this development is mixed use. So there's an opportunity for a person to potentially work in an office and then stop at a restaurant on their way home and pick up dinner, or, you know, so one trip may actually be, or two trips may equate to actually only one trip. So there is an internal, that's called internal capture. We used a little bit of a reduction based on internal capture. So as I think I went over this before, but we had 4 access points on Lander Road, and then 2 of those were to the residential area to the south. The 2 main traffic circle roundabout accesses off of Lander and Chagrin, and then that northern access point into the office. That would probably be a a left in, right out. And this is just a summary of the trips that were estimated based on the land uses. So we looked at, single family housing, low rise, all the different land uses expected on the site, and the site sizes or units, and came up with some trip generation numbers for both the AM and the PM peak. So as a comparison, we wanted to look at different scenarios. The first scenario was just take the traffic that's out there now from 2018, grow it using that 3% per year growth rate, and assume no development. Nothing happens at Beachbrook, and that no improvements are made to Lander Circle. The second scenario was to add the development, add the property development at Beachbrook, but still make no improvements to Lander Circle. And then the third and fourth scenarios are very similar in the fact that we use that full-blown traffic analysis, the full traffic of 2018 traffic grown with the added development, and then make some improvements to Lander Circle, create a proper roundabout as a 1-lane option or a 2-lane option. So in 2023, if nothing happens on the site, that's the first 2 columns. No development. This is just if things continue the way that we would expect. The approach roadways, so this is just looking at the circle itself, the approaches to Lander Circle perform very poorly in both the AM and the PM timeframes, peak periods. If you move out to, if you look at the part of this that looks nice, is when you redevelop Lander Circle and make it a roundabout, a proper roundabout with yield conditions, less confusion, and you really start to see improvements. And at this point, it doesn't matter that there's development traffic because it's performing so well, especially here. Our real goal is a level of service C or better, and that is fully accomplished during both peaks with a 2-lane roundabout. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why that slides down there, but anyway, this was a schematic of the roundabout that we assumed, the 2-lane roundabout, just to give you an idea of what it might look like. It allows for some added green space here. You actually, reduce the width of what the circle is now, and you can take back some green land. It also involves consolidating some access points, because a lot of the confusion around Lander Circle right now is based on the multiple access points. So it involves hesitation of drivers. It's a little unclear if it's 1 lane or 2, and how people use that. And I do apologize, this slide looks like this, but you know, this allows for some direct right turns on some of the legs, and it really improves the way flow would work in that area. So a roundabout in general is always an increase in safety, and in this case, to create a proper roundabout with the reduction of those access points and clearer markings, you would definitely see an increase in safety. It would also increase your capacity, because they're, like, as I said, the yield condition would function properly. You'd have a reduction in the right-of-way that the circle takes up right now, and there's opportunity for multimodal, you know, applications. You could have bike paths along here, potentially add more sidewalks, and just in general, it opens up some space for better use. So really, the conclusions of the traffic study pointed pretty loudly to one thing, and that's that a properly configured roundabout at the circle will serve problems that you're already seeing in Pepper Pike in this location, but also it would really solve any future problems. And that access management along the circle will result in a safety benefit for sure, and also a benefit to the congestion problems that may already exist and that would most certainly exist in the future. And the roundabout design would allow for a level of service A in the future, even with the development. So, another piece that I didn't talk about when I was on the development screen, but that those 2 access points, the circles between Lander Road and Chagrin Boulevard, the 2 main access points to the northern piece of the development, really provide an access through the site that could be used to connect traffic that uses Lander Road and Chagrin Boulevard, and maybe keep those people out of the circle entirely. So I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. You did a really nice job on that presentation. Is there a slide that you wanted to bring back up in case people have questions about traffic? We can have that ready to go for when the questions start getting asked. And Dion, are you ready? It looks like Dion lost power. So really quickly, we're going to share our screen to go over the question and answer format. Caroline's going to pull that up for us. We are doing the Q&A today about the things that we've talked about. So things like city infrastructure, the local ecology, and traffic. At the bottom of your screen, if you scroll down and kind of hover into that little bar, you will see a Q&A function. We've already received some questions throughout the presentation, but please feel free to ask your questions there. And if something else comes up as you're hearing these panelists answer the question, please, again, feel free to keep asking your questions. We will be compiling your questions so that we're weeding out any repeats and making sure that the questions are on the topics that were discussed today. So just to make sure that everybody could hear, we're making sure that the participants are muted. The panelists' videos will be visible as soon as I'm done talking. And while we won't get to every question tonight, we will record all of the questions and make sure to get back to you at the appropriate time. So really quickly, we're just going to switch this format so that you can see these ground rules. If you have any questions with the Q&A, feel free to call the number that you called before to RSVP. We've already received quite a few questions. So I'm going to start by turning this back over to Dion so she can go through the questions that are being asked of the panelists tonight while I help put the questions together. So Dion, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Vanessa. So our first question is for Alex. Alex, this question comes from Linda Sakura and various community members. We've heard this a couple times throughout the process. If this project doesn't go through, can the Western Reserve Land Conservancy just come in and buy it, protect it as a green space?
Yeah, thank you, Dion. Yes, that's appreciate the question. I guess I'll answer a couple different aspects of that question. Number one, the property is not currently available, so the property is under contract with Axiom. So we're working on the opportunity that is at hand, which is to perpetually conserve approximately 25 acres of the Beachbrook property. Part of the question is if this property becomes available into the future, would the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, could the Western Reserve Land Conservancy conserve it? There's always a could. I'd say just frankly with all the viewers today that our understanding of the value of this property is extremely significant, many millions of dollars. From our standpoint as an organization, we've done a lot of projects that are $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million, but once we start exceeding those numbers, it gets very difficult for our organization to secure both philanthropic and public grant sources to acquire, protect a property like this. So, you know, I guess what I would say is it's never impossible, but you know, there's a large price tag, our understanding, associated with this project, and you know, there's never any guarantees in conservation. So, you know, we're working with the opportunity that's presented to us today, and that's kind of where we're at.
Thank you, Alex. This next question is for Brian O'Looney. Brian, this question comes from Gerard Barstasevich. I understand there are approximately 260 properties at Sterling Lakes. I've watched the traffic coming in and out of the development. The traffic was very minimal. Will there be less properties at the Axiom development?
There'd be a similar, there'd be fewer units, but residential units, but less properties. There is a similar amount of development in the project. I can't say it's equal, and we don't know what the density will be in the end. Once we start going through a public process, which we hope to engage with the community, we would learn more about what the desire for unit types would be. There may be an interest in more one-story units, for example, for folks who are downsizing. And if that's the case, that might make their, and depending on what zoning was finally enabled, that might increase unit count at that time. But as currently thought, the units are similar to what you said existed at Sterling Lakes.
Thank you, Brian. Our next question is for Christian and Jeff. This is a two-part question that comes from Sarah Hannibal. In discussing walkable community, has there been a discussion with the city about sidewalks to this new neighborhood so residents from the other parts of Pepper Pike can walk there? And how can we be certain that they would be enacted?
Well, I can start the answer to that question. And certainly given, I think that is generally a benefit to the development and a benefit to Pepper Pike as a whole. However, I think some of that would be kind of a further discussion with the city on kind of once the development is more finalized, how what its connectivity actually looks like. I don't know. I think it would be the intent of the city to, and the intent of the development to make those connections because it's a mutually beneficial piece of infrastructure. And the other thing is that when Vanessa talked about the roundabout, we feel strongly about that, not just because it presents a really good opportunity to fix traffic, but one of the key things that Vanessa mentioned is that it opens up a key to create better pedestrian access around the circle, which is really non-existent right now. And so you're gaining back, I think it's around an acre of property that if you really want to look at Pepper Pike's kind of the creation of a city center, pedestrian and bike access around that is enabled through that roundabout. So I think that's something that would be kind of part and parcel to the development of a roundabout if that were pursued. I don't know if Brian or Jeff want to pitch in or add anything.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So because we're in the zoning stage, those types of specific conversations haven't taken place. We have had general conversations with the city and members of the Planning Commission and Council about our desire to have a walkable district in and around Lander Circle. And you've seen that reflected in some of the planning documents that were put forward by the city well before Axiom came on the scene and went under contract on Beachbrook. There was, I believe, a 2016 reconfiguration plan for Lander Circle that showed sidewalks and bike lanes in and around Lander Circle, and then also heading down Chagrin Boulevard. So walkability is something that the city has expressed interest in. It's definitely something that we're interested in. So it's definitely something that we would hope to explore moving forward.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Arda Kassan Golden, and this question is for Alex. Alex, did you say that the Western Reserve Land Conservancy won't own the land? And if they don't own it, who will? And will they only have access to the easement area?
Yeah, so Land Conservancy typically does not own land long-term. There are instances where there are highly strategic properties that we own for a various reason or purpose. That is not necessarily our intention with the Beachbrook property. Our intention is to protect the property in perpetuity. In terms of public access, that again really won't be up to us in that scenario, in that case. I believe Brian can answer that, but the intent is to make it the 24-acre area, approximately 24-acre area, publicly accessible. Yes.
Yeah, what I will say, if I'm understanding the question correctly, our goal is to make the conservation area accessible to the public for the first time in the property's history. So, in order to do that, you would need to be able to have access to the park area from the project itself and the adjoining neighborhood. So our goal would be to provide that access. Absolutely.
Thank you. Vanessa, I have a couple of traffic questions that are going to be coming your way. This first one also is from Arda and Manny Naft. Both have raised the same question, which is who's going to pay for the improvements to the existing traffic circle and the addition of the second traffic circle? How much will it cost, and will these improvements only happen on Lander Circle with the development?
Well, I will say that the development itself could generate revenue for the city to be able to potentially have some funding for the circle. I can't speak to, if I don't believe that the development would pay for it, but I will say that improvements can apply for funding, but you have to show some improvements to safety in order to apply for that. So you could apply for safety funding, for instance. And in order to do that, you have to demonstrate that the level of service is improved, or there's an improvement to safety. So I think there's a good case to be made for that. So there's all sorts of grants and funding streams that could be explored from the city's perspective.
I'm also going to jump in and
Thank you.
add a little more color to that response. So with or without the development, Lander Circle must get fixed. I think that Vanessa's presentation and the traffic studies that we've done and just people's everyday experience show that a level of service F in and around Lander Circle is just not an acceptable situation for the residents to have to deal with. With the project, the tax revenue that is generated by the project will help the city pay for those improvements. Without it, the city will be forced to spend somewhere between $2.5 to $3.5 million to fix it with existing revenue that the city has. And 2.5 to 3.5 is a somewhat conservative estimate, and there's the potential that it could substantially deplete a portion of the reserves that the city has accumulated over the past couple of years. So if you follow that up with additional changes from Columbus that have put pressures on municipalities, start to pay for other things like road repair, the stormwater issues that residents have all been experiencing. You can see why coming out of pocket without the development could pose a problem a few years down the road.
Thank you, Brian. Vanessa, another traffic question. This one comes from Nancy Nazik. Nancy says that she's surprised to see that a tighter circle at Lander Circle would be safer and more efficient. She'd like you to be able to explain how that works. If there's less distance between the enter and exit roads, which seems that it would be harder to get off the circle.
Sure. So part of the issue, I believe, the existing issue with Lander Circle is the lack of clarity on what's happening. It really ends up being treated more like a stop condition instead of a yield condition as a proper roundabout would be. And I'm sorry, I got distracted. Let me share my screen so we have something to
Thank you.
talk from. Okay. So, and also, the issue that I mentioned is these access points into the circle. That's a big no-no with the flow of a roundabout. So it's not really operating efficiently because you have people popping in and out and slowing down in places that they're not meant to right now. And again, with the it's wide enough to be 2 lanes, but people don't treat it 2 lanes. Is the striping existent, and does it really allow people to understand what's going on? Whereas with the roundabout, and again, I apologize about this slide because it's not as clear. It's here. Oh, maybe I can move it. Here we go. There we go. The way that a roundabout is safe is there's some radius things that happen that guide traffic into proper positioning for yielding and entering the circle cleanly, which you don't have today. So those radiuses are very important when you enter a circle. As well as clear pavement markings, the splitter islands. Again, this is like controlling the way traffic comes in and out of the circle. And I will admit that I am not the roadway designer. I am the traffic engineer, so I'm even a little out of my depth here. But the other piece of that is that those access points that I described, pulling those out of the circle so there's no impedance to the flow of the people as they enter and exit the roundabout, and you're really only dealing with those 5 legs instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different other access points. And then you have I think I mentioned this as well, but you have those right turners that can come straight off of Lander and go to Chagrin without ever even having to enter the circle. Same with the Chagrin to Pine Tree leg. So it really cleans up the traffic that is going into the circle by eliminating the access points, but it also the geometry and the way that folks are driven and forced kind of into the circle at the right angle helps improves the safety.
Thank you. And you know what, Vanessa, if you could keep that up, because I think you might want to use that for another question that we have coming.
Sure.
So Manny Naft is asking, what is the delay and backup that the access roundabouts will have due to cross traffic?
Oh, the roundabouts for the development? You mean the circles down here we're talking about?
I believe so, yes.
Those operate perfectly. I mean, they're an A, or they're about as good of an A as you can get. And I'm sorry I didn't include that on the slide, but there was really no issue with those. And honestly, we looked at those as stop control. So stop control from the development itself, but not stopping traffic on Lander and Chagrin. We also looked at stop controlled for all directions, and that was immediately eliminated because you don't really want to put a stop on Lander or Chagrin this close to the circle because you wouldn't want to back up traffic into the circle, whatever it becomes, if it's a roundabout or stays as it is. But no, there's really no issue with delay coming in and out of here. The flows are very nice, and the development traffic is not coming out at such a force that the roads can't handle it. So those roundabouts operate really nicely. It's A's in all conditions, I believe. Thank
you. And then John Sullivan wanted to know, Vanessa, will the continuous traffic flow lines at Lander Circle be illuminated at night?
So I'm not sure. I think maybe we're talking about the pavement striping, and Typically, so I'm not sure exactly what's going to be put out here because this is not a full-blown design yet, but there would definitely be either street lighting to make sure that you can see the pavement striping, or thermoplastic pavement striping that's reflective. There's also the option of raised pavement markers. But yes, I mean, obviously the pavement striping itself is very important in a roundabout, and especially in a 2-lane roundabout, which is what we're suggesting is really the best option here. So it would be either illuminated using street lighting or thermoplastic and reflective pavement striping.
Okay, and then Vanessa and Brian, you can jump in on this one. This question comes from Manny Naft. Scenarios B and C call for residents funding for this project for 30 years. Does that mean residents will fund the traffic improvements?
I think that is really a question for city officials, right? We know, and they know, that Lander Circle is a problem that needs to be addressed. They've had their own traffic studies dating back to at least 2006 that have said that, and engineers have been working on it for years. What we're providing here is the ability to generate enough tax revenue to potentially help that situation. But beyond that, the decision would be up to the city. It wouldn't be on a private developer to make that kind of determination.
Thank you. And then Vanessa, I'm going to ask you one more question and give you a break. So this question comes from Manny Naft. What percentage of increased traffic to the area, when we say 20%, how many thousands of cars are we talking about?
Oh man, that's a zinger. I should know this off the top of my head. So can I take a minute and I can probably
Absolutely.
give you
Yep. Nope. We can come
a
back to
real
that.
concrete answer? Okay.
No, I appreciate it. You take your time, and I'm going to direct this next question to Brian. Brian, this is from Tony Gentile. Would payment be required to the landowners for closing down some of their access points on a reconfigured circle?
So I don't know that I actually would be the expert. I feel like Dale would be better suited to answer that question.
Yeah,
Thank you, Dale.
Brian, yeah, Tony, it's a good question. As long as the property owner still has access to the same route, there is no taking and no compensation. If you eliminate an access in its entirety on one side of a property, then there could be a taking. And the way this is designed by AECom, there would be no loss of access from any side of that property that has it now. So there would be no compensation. Brian, there was one other thing I was going to add. I was in a council meeting in Chagrin Falls last night, and we just got a state loan for an infrastructure project we're doing. The interest rate was 0.03% on that loan. And you know, who wouldn't want to borrow money at that rate for 30 years? You're literally making money on that. So there's a lot of very, very inexpensive money. The city also has a pretty significant reserve of cash, and the city could fully fund that if it so choose to pay for those improvements now. It's an issue that I think they need to consider again. But the other point you made was that your project would help pay for that. And I think what people may not realize, the income tax from the new businesses that could be there would be very, very significant, and could be a large percentage boost to the current income taxes that we get now. Thanks.
Thank you, Dale. Brian, this next question comes from Maureen Hull. How will the Beachbrook property be integrated with or connected through the Hiram House property?
So the short answer is that it will not. So we've not had any conversations with Hiram House at all. Hiram House is a privately owned piece of property that is used for Hiram House's nonprofit mission. The two properties don't actually connect to one another. They're separated by the Orange School campus. So there's no connection between the Beachbrook property and the Hiram House property at this time.
Thank you. And then one more for you, Brian. Gerard Barsasevich is asking, as previously mentioned, 68% of the Pepper Pike residents are over 55 years of age. So there's many empty nesters, and they'd like to downsize to a one-story property, but they'd like to stay on Pepper Pike. How many one-story units will be in the new development, and what will be the price ranges?
So what I will say is that the site plan that we show, it includes 82 new construction homes south of the creek, and an additional 28 north of the creek. And those, any one of those could be configured as a single story home. So up to that amount could conceivably be single story, single family. And to his point, we do believe that there is very significant demand for that type of housing product.
Thank you. Vanessa, are you ready?
Yes.
Thank you.
So can you repeat the question for me though?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the question, and then I have several more for you, believe it or not. What is the percentage of increased traffic to the area, 20%, and how many thousands of cars are we really talking about?
Well, okay, so there's kind of two ways to answer this, and I guess the first way would be in ADTs, we're not going to make a huge impact, but you're probably more thinking of like the AM and the PM peak, which is really what we looked at closely because those are the big impacts from the development during the day, like the peaks. So this diagram here shows some existing traffic information, and this is today or the 2018 count, I guess. So, you know, just keep an eye on a couple of the volumes. 500, 800, you know, somewhere in that vicinity. So let me show you, and I apologize, this will take me a second, the way that I'm sharing this. I don't think, can you see, did that switch for everybody? Can you see a different set of numbers now?
No.
No, okay, so let me, I need to share a different screen. I'm sorry, hold on just a second. And then here we go. So they go up, but really we're talking about maybe 100 cars, maybe 200 cars during the peaks. And they're going to look worse down here because that's going straight into the development. But really it's not. And maybe a better illustration was that slide I had in the PowerPoint that showed the actual breakdown of trips during the AM and the PM peak. So let me show that. Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm trying to flip to my slide from, for some reason, I don't see that as a choice. Let me see if I can just,
Brian, while Vanessa's getting ready for the screen, a number of people have asked where they can get the latest traffic study, the fourth traffic study.
I don't believe, I believe that it's actually already available on our website, pepperpikeneighborhood.com. So it would be available there.
Thank you.
so this is the impacts that you see to your AM and the peak periods. So 300 and 200 coming in and out of the site during the morning, and then 200 and, you know, under 300 in most cases in and out. And it's a little bit lower because we assume some of this traffic is already driving by the site and it just diverts and goes in and stops by for coffee in the morning on their way to work, or stops at a yoga class on their way home from work, or, you know, so there's a little bit of a reduction. That's what this pass by indicates. And that's really only normally considered in the afternoon. So actually my coffee example is a bad one, but the yoga is a good one. So, and just to give you an idea, in a lot of reviewing agencies, if you bring more than, I think 200 trips or 250 is their cutoff of whether or not you even need to perform a traffic impact study. If you're under that margin, that's not considered an impact large enough for you to do a study, to give you some perspective.
Thank you. So Vanessa, Tony Gentile is asking if this traffic study was done before Pinecrest, do you plan to do a new traffic study, or how can you be sure that this one's accurate?
Well, like I said, we did include a pretty conservative growth rate in order to capture some of that traffic, because you're right, that wasn't part of it. And another, there's an opportunity that this study would be refined a little bit once we get closer to the real aid of the development, and we would potentially update the traffic counts to reflect that. The problem now is with COVID, to be quite honest, almost any traffic volumes you're going to use are going to be calibrated. So what we've done here is really, I think, and I feel really comfortable saying that it's a conservative estimate, even without that being included in the 2018 count.
And then Vanessa, I have another question from John Sullivan. John says that the gas station Waterworks is a car wash that regularly has cars backed up onto the circle. And at times traffic headed south on Lander is stalled at the circle because the line of cars, the car wash is blocking traffic. What can be done to stop that traffic backup?
Well, so obviously, I think if this roundabout were to come into reality, you are closing some access points would be, which to be honest, I'm not, I don't know how bad the backups are today. I haven't seen that condition happen, but if you don't have conflicting folks coming in and out of the site, a lot of times it just actually helps the flow. So you might see a situation where it becomes more circular and folks come in mostly off of Lander and then go back out on Chagrin. And I think the access to the car wash is over on this part of the building, if I'm right. And I think is what you said, that the backup is happening on Lander. So there's some width that could be added here too, and it looks like it would potentially be 2 lanes. But my hope would be that the circulation would actually improve at the site, and a problem that exists today would go away with some of that access management.
And then I have another traffic question, Vanessa. This is from Manny Naft. There are hairpin turns from Lander Road, north to Chagrin Boulevard, west to Chagrin Boulevard, east to Lander Road. How will safety be improved there?
So outside, we're talking about beyond what's shown here.
Correct.
Well, there's not really an impact to those areas from this. To be honest, what is happening beyond this is not really going to be impacted. I mean, the entry to the circle, as I talked about with a new roundabout, would be improved, but things beyond what's really on this map is not going to be touched.
And so the entry points with the 2-lane will increase safety?
Yes, at the Lander Circle location. But if there's a hairpin turn, further on down the road, those geometrics are not going to be improved.
Okay, thank you. Dale, I have another question from Manny. Manny is saying that chapter 1271 does not appear to allow for a park in the riparian corridor.
The use of the land for a park would be an incidental and accessory use of the property. So it would be permitted. And also under the U2 zoning, public uses are permitted. So it would be covered under both ways. Because if the zoning is approved, you have the overlay, but the U2 is still available. So you'd still have that opportunity. And the park land would be an accessory use to the residential development.
Thank you. This next question is for Alex, Dale.
I'm sorry, I said accessory. I should have said incidental use. I said the wrong word, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for clarifying. So this next question could be taken by Alex, Brian, or Dale. This came from Emmy Workman, not tonight, but was something that was raised on social media that we wanted to make sure to address this evening. Will the trails be directly connected to the high school, and what can we do to make sure that our children are safe?
I'd be happy to take that. So
Thank you.
So the safety of our community in general is obviously something that's of the utmost importance to us. I'm the parent of a would-be Orange student. I attended the Orange schools myself. I had education classes. I didn't know at the time that they're on the Beachbrook property, but they were on the Beachbrook property. So We don't take the safety of the students lightly, and we've had ongoing communications with the school board, and we'll continue to do that throughout the course of the project. The bottom line is that the school property abuts to the conservation area, and having a park near school provides many opportunities for learning, which I think is a benefit. I also don't anticipate that the school's rules about access necessarily would change as a result of the Beach Brook project being developed. So we're all on the same team and agree that safety is important.
Thank you. I have a question from Articasan Golden, and this could be addressed by Christian or Brian. Who will manage and monitor the stormwater basins, and will the city have to pay for it?
So I can start answering that. The stormwater basins are part of the development. They're a requirement of the development, and so they would have to be maintained in some way, shape, or form by the development. What was the second part of? There was a second part of the question, I believe.
The second part of the question.
The stormwater basins, and then does the city have to pay for it?
So no, that would be the development's responsibility to maintain those, and it would be part of the permit, and they would be held to that for there's regular inspections of those basins by in most cases that would be Cuyahoga Soil and Water Conservation District, making sure that those are maintained, and there's penalties if you don't. So.
And then Christian, Linda Sakura was asking, and Jeff, you could weigh in as well. She's concerned that building on a sloped basin, such as the forested areas surrounding Willey Creek, may result in erosion, flooding, and impacts to the land, freshwater system ecology, and hydrology, including downstream for residents along the Chagrin River who are already experiencing flooding. And in a failed construction project, how do you plan to build around those concerns?
So what we've looked at right now is it's a really good question, because I can see why that would be. One would imagine that there's very limited flat area on that end of the site, but the way we've modeled it right now, there is sufficient flat space above the basins. Have to be at a higher elevation at the stream, so they're not going to be down in the creek elevation. They're going to be 25 to 30 feet above that, and they would be fully separated from that. And water, as I talked about a little bit in my presentation, per Pepper Pike zoning, we will be reducing the amount of water that's released from the site compared to today by quite a significant amount, actually. For example, if per the zoning, if there's a 50-year storm, if that site is fully developed on the northern side, the development would have to release water the same as if there was a 1-year storm on the existing site. So there will be a net decrease in the amount of water, the rate at which water enters Willey Creek. And therefore, that is why we can say that there would be actually a reduced potential for flooding as a result of the stormwater management requirements that would be imposed on any development project here.
I would just add to that the Soil and Water Conservation Service is also going to be monitoring construction. So it's something that will be very carefully monitored and watched over. And Kristen, I don't know if you want to add to that or not.
No, I mean, there's a lot of a process that goes into it to both, and really important to think about is not just after construction, but during construction. So similarly, Cuyahoga Soil and Water, requires to, in pretty extensive detail, explain how you're going to control stormwater during a construction process, which is equally as important. So and they do have regular inspections that are part of that permitting process.
Christian, could you also tell us, this was a question that was raised in a previous session, but we saved it for today. What size trees will be replacing the trees that are removed for this plan?
Well, we can't, of course, we don't know right now because we don't have a final plan in place, but I would just say, having worked on a lot of projects similar to this, is that what is really critical about creating the type of environment that I think is the developer wants to create here is that pedestrian comfort, kind of user comfort is critical, and a key part of that is creating shade and canopy. And so, I would imagine, and Brian can probably supplement this answer, but I think having kind of lush vegetation within the development and along its edges is going to be a really important part, because even within parking areas, that becomes an important part of making a successful place, and which I think is kind of a key point of this development. It's about creating a place, not just a shopping center.
Yeah, no, that is an important point. That our plan is to plant 2 trees for every tree that's removed during the building of this project. And as Chris said during his answer just now, it's too early on in the process to say exactly what size those trees are. But I think that it's fairly straightforward that small trees don't enhance a new community or create a sense of place the same way that established larger trees do. And because of all that, our plan is to work with land design architects, or landscape architects, site planners, and other consultants to help ensure that our project meets the latest demands for environmental and ecological health and the well-being of our community. We're planning on exploring any and all, and actually Brian O'Looney could speak to this, explore any and all sustainably responsible building practices that we can, and explore ways to lay out the site so that it's that it works towards the benefit of the overall ecology of the area.
Sure, I'll comment quickly on that. So in terms of site planning, we have street trees shown in the plan, both north of the creek and south of the creek. There's a substantial amount of trees there that, in our experience, grow relatively quickly. And we find trees that mature relatively fast for that. In terms of the overall plan, I suspect, like most developers doing this day, we will be pursuing a variety of sustainable initiatives in the building designs. There will likely be different programs for the residential housing than there is for the office buildings, because there are different programs that are best suited for those building types. So there are a number of programs that are specific to housing, and there are a number of programs specific to the commercial buildings, and we'll use the appropriate standard for the two. And for sure we'll be using Energy Star appliances and using the best practices in terms of stormwater, as Christian has already laid out, so that the water, just by redeveloping, there will be a lot less water going into the creek network because of the standards that are in place, as Christian had described. So I think there's a lot of sustainable benefits for Pepper Pike and anyone downstream that's going to happen because of this project.
Thank you very much. Alex, when you were speaking, somebody named Bill, sorry he didn't provide his last name, raised the question of who is paying you.
Yeah, so organizationally, we're 501c3, so we're funded by philanthropic gifts and also some program-related revenue. Just like any conservation transaction, we engage as an organization, there's certain stewardship obligations and fees that we require for any project, whether it's with a developer, a private landowner, park district, or any other entity that we might partner with. And so those same rules apply for this transaction. That's not something we're going to disclose per our contract. We have a confidentiality agreement with Axiom, so that's not a number that I'm willing to disclose. But we are working with them to be compensated appropriately for the conservation that we're doing.
Thank you very much. So Brian Aluni or Brian Stone, if you would take this next question. This is raised by Manny Naff. Are the streets in the development going to be dedicated roads? And if so, who pays for the roads and how exactly does that work?
I do believe, and Dale, I think, would actually probably be a good person to jump in on this. They would be internal roads that are paid for and constructed by the development itself, not by the onus wouldn't be on the city to pay for roads that are benefiting the development itself. And notwithstanding, and we haven't reached a final. I would imagine that the city, they would still be city roads in the sense that traffic or garbage and things like that would be handled by the city. It is important to note that the development is not seeking any tax abatements. Therefore, the tax revenue that's generated by the development itself will generate funds for city services to offset costs.
Brian, let me add to that, in the site plan review, those kind of issues get resolved as to which portions of the property might be public versus private. If you think of like the villas off of Brainerd or Sterling Lakes, some of those roads are public, some of them are private, and that could be a mix here. But again, the city doesn't ever pay for that infrastructure. That's always paid for by the developer and then either dedicated to the public or maintained by the mandatory master association we'll have here.
And I'll just add, the character of the streets, whether we're public or private, often will depend upon what the goal of the particular roadway is. For the more pedestrian-oriented streets, they're usually easier to implement as private roadways because the standards are not as exacting and less vehicular in character. And so that may be part of the decision that would go into the choice. But to create the kind of character that this team is seeking for the center, particularly on the north, for the north green space.
Thank you. And as we did 2 weeks ago, our goal was to try to wrap up close to 8:30. So we have a few minutes left this evening, so there won't be time to answer any additional questions. We're going to try to get through all of those that have been submitted. So we might go a couple minutes over, but we're going to try our best to address these last couple quickly. This question comes from Doreen Markowitz Schreiber. And the question is, and if anybody feels comfortable taking this one, developments of any kind create trash during the building process that flies off trucks and they end up in our sewers, lakes, and streams. How do we plan on preventing this?
So I could actually jump in on this.
Thank you.
So as part of any construction project, there's stormwater protection measures that are put in place in order to prevent that from happening. They are checked regularly by the applicable governmental authority that comes and does on-site inspections to make sure that all your stormwater protections are intact and doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's not special and particular to the Beachbrook development. It would be any development anywhere would have to follow those rules.
Thank you. Christian, this question is being raised by Manny Naft. We've experienced a lot of our retention ponds are not able to handle what we already have. How would we address that?
Can you state that again? You cut out a little bit there.
Oh, sorry, of course. We've experienced a lot of flooding and our retention ponds are not able to handle what we have. How will you address that?
So one thing I would say, and I don't know specifically what retention ponds are being kind of water flooding now, but I will say that the zoning code requirements regarding stormwater and Pepper Pike are very stringent. And historically, when there was kind of rampant development in the 70s, 80s, the stormwater code in a lot of, we could just say Northeast Ohio's suburban communities didn't really kind of follow the pace of development. And so we do, and we're sort of seeing the impacts of that now. So, however, the current stormwater code that's kind of would be implemented or imposed upon this development from Pepper Pike, like I said, is pretty aggressive and is very in the sense that it will reduce the amount of flooding that would occur. We're taking up to a 100-year storm, which, if just for context, that's the likelihood of a storm occurring in a given year for a 100-year storm is 1%. That all of that water by code would have to be managed through the stormwater system that would be constructed as part of any development. And again, we're being held to a standard that would reduce the runoff from the site. So all the stormwater would be collected and released at a rate way slower than it is today. Additionally, that water would be put into a basin and not take up flood capacity within Willey Creek corridor as it does today. So both by the measures of collecting it all and holding it greater than today, as well as not putting any into the corridor, you would have a reduced flooding impact.
Thank you. I have two last questions about traffic, but before I get to those questions, Dale, I wanted to come back to you about chapter 1271 and the ability to use that property for parks.
Yeah, after the question was asked, I decided to go back and look at the proposed ordinance. In section 1271.05B, there's a requirement for a minimum open space of 30%. And in that section, it specifically says that public open space shall be distributed throughout the district, and it can include plazas, parks, pocket parks, and visual landscape relief. And so clearly they contemplate public parks. And in addition, the design is supposed to be supportive of opportunities for community interaction. So I read that as not only being an incidental use that's allowed, but a specifically permitted use and contemplated by the ordinance.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you for going back to find that. We appreciate it. So I have two last questions this evening. This next question, Vanessa, is a traffic question raised by Manny Knapp. How is the traffic impact on the rest of the city being addressed? What is happening at the corner of Lander and South Woodland? What is happening at the corner of Lander and Harvard? What's happening in front of the Orange campus and the library on Chagrin Boulevard? And certainly if anybody in addition to Vanessa could jump in, I'd appreciate it.
So I will say that holistically, we did not look at intersections beyond the ones that I described in the slides. So we looked at all the entry points to the circle and the entrances for the development. However, I can kind of speak to the fact that if backups are occurring right now related to the circle, so people are struggling to enter the circle, I would say that that would trickle back out and would be improved with the roundabout. So if there are backups to nearby intersections because of the queues at the circle, I think that would be reduced, because what we would be seeing is level service A, which means basically there aren't backups. But again, we did not include the intersections beyond those shown in the study area in the full analysis. And that, again, is something that, could be revisited if need be once the development gets a little bit further along the line, if that's what is required.
Thank you very much. And then this next question could be for Brian or Vanessa, and this is raised by Tony Gentile and Manny Knapp. When you say $2.5 to $3.5 million to improve traffic and the area around it is conservative, do you mean that that estimate's on the high side? And who ultimately is going to be responsible for paying for that?
So I could take that. What I meant by conservative is that that was probably on the lower end. But again, it's, as Vanessa pointed out, what we've provided is a conceptual thing of what would work to improve traffic conditions in and around Lander Circle. As I said in the past, or earlier in the presentation, that question is Lander Circle is already a problem, and it's going to continue to be a problem into the foreseeable future unless something is done. What we're offering is the ability to help defray some of that cost through the use of this, the value that's generated through this development. So it really is up to the city and the voters how that reconfiguration would be handled.
Brian, this is Chris. I can just add that those numbers that you cited are very much conservative. As we look back to a number of projects that we've done implementing roundabouts and similar, like City of Green, Fairlawn, the cost that we saw actually after it was built was less than that, in the 1.5 to 2.5 million dollar range. One thing that can often drive the cost up for roundabouts is property acquisition, and which in this case, because we're actually reducing the footprint of the roundabout, would be not an issue or a very small kind of cost of the project.
It is important to note that we haven't done any sort of subsurface examination of the circle. I know that there is a fiber line, a fairly important fiber line that runs along the balance of Chagrin. I don't know if that's located in the circle or how that would affect things. It's a conceptual estimate based on the drawing that we made, but you would really need to get into a pretty significant design review process in order to determine what the number would be.
Thank you. And they've snuck one more question in on me, so we're going to get this last one in. And Vanessa, this is for you. Are you comfortable with the assumptions that are made in the traffic study?
Yes, I am. I think we built in some conservative, and we keep using that word, but I think we built in some good growth rates that are on the high side. And given what we know is happening out there in reality, and quite frankly, what may happen just in general in the future with traffic and the way people travel, I feel that the traffic volumes that we use were high, if anything. And so I feel comfortable, yes.
Thank you very much. We'd certainly like to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists this evening. Tonight was the second in a series of 3 of these community conversations. There will be a final question and answer session on what happens after rezoning. We still have not determined that date. We will once we are able to confirm the availability of our industry experts. So before we close this evening, are there any of the panelists who have anything that they would like to share before we wrap up?
No, thank you everyone for their time tonight, and thank you for your questions.
Thank you everybody, and have a good evening.